Welcome to Still Speak Podcast. Good evening, everybody. It's been over 24 hours since the body highly believed to be 22-year-old Gabby Petito was recovered in Grand Teton National Park in the Spread Creek dispersing camp area, close to where Gabby's van was caught on another vlogger's video footage off a dirt road, and this park is in Wyoming. Last night I read to you a statement from the Laundrie's family lawyer, Steve Bertolino, and he basically said that it was heartbreaking and that they were going to be praying for the family. And this particular statement, they actually called her Gabby Petito. In prior statements this past week, they were referring to her as Miss Petito. So it's nice that they actually called her by her name. Petito and Schmidt lawyer also gave a statement, and they thanked law enforcement and asked the media to please not contact the family at this time. I think that should go without saying, but unfortunately people don't have any common sense, so therefore he had to. First thing this morning, it was announced that Gabby's autopsy would be performed on Tuesday, tomorrow. I'm sure it will be done by the FBI, and if not, at minimum, it will be that agents are present at the autopsy. It was also announced earlier today that they suspended the search for Brian Laundrie for the time being, and they also halted all media interviews by law enforcement. Not but a very short time later, alerts started going off that police and FBI had swarmed the Laundrie home. And I say swarm, but they didn't go in there with their guns drawn and what have you, but they all came in a caravan. There was a lot of them, and they quickly sped up on the house, jumped out of their cars, and ran up to the house. And at one point after they arrived and they were all entering the home, the mother and father of Brian Laundrie were both escorted to a black minivan that was on their property. And I say on their property because it was literally on their front lawn, pulled up very close to their front door. And because they were escorted out to this minivan, I can only assume that they did this intentionally so that the parents can get in the minivan quickly because there was all this media across the street and what have you. And so, loads of agents, so many. And they were bringing in equipment and supplies, I'm sure all of which was used for any potential evidence. And at one point, a news helicopter captured some agents in the backyard who seemed to be really interested in a shed back there. They took a lot of pictures outside and inside this shed. And this is like a larger shed. You can probably, some would call it a she shed. Or, you can fit like a lot of equipment. Multiple people can fit in this particular shed. And there's a picture circulating of them near the pool area that is screened in. And the agents have shields, and it looks like they're pointing guns. I actually think they're taser guns, as they were about to open another shed. But this shed is very small. It's one of those, I think they actually sell them at Walmart. It's one of those like Rubbermaid ones, double doors, and you can like lift the top and then open the doors, and it's maybe 4 feet high, but one person can fit in it. And I assume they were doing this with the thought process that Brian might be hiding in there. So they wanted to take the precaution, you know what I'm saying? So they kind of prepared themselves before they opened it. We then found out that they were there to execute a court-approved search warrant. And the details of that particular warrant is unknown at this time. It will probably be a few days before we hear about it. If it happens tonight while I'm recording this, I'll add it at the end. Brian's parents being removed from the home and put in this van then made sense, right? Because with this knowledge, we know that they don't want them in the home so that they don't get in the way and contaminate anything they could possibly deem as evidence. And the parents weren't in the van for very long, and they were returned to the home, where FBI continued to stay in this home for an extended period of time with the Northport police standing guard outside. And we even saw them bringing in coolers, possibly for drinks and food for the agents, maybe even for the parents too. Yes, they offer food when they're doing interviews, if that's what they were doing. I don't personally think that they were still searching the home once the parents went back inside the home. So I lean on, after they were told to go back inside, that they were probably talking to the parents. That being said, it's also possible that they went in after removing the parents and they cleared out one area of the house and then allowed them to come back inside while they finished searching the rest of the home. So let's say the living room. Like they went in, they did a sweep of the living room, and then they said, okay, you can come back inside. Because remember, all the media is outside, helicopters, etc. So that's also possible, that they said, okay, you have to stay in this room, do not leave this room, we're searching the rest of the house. We don't know, but it could be either things. If they were speaking to the FBI, I want to know, were they solely still talking about just Brian? Or did they finally decide to cooperate with police and FBI since Gabby was now officially deceased and she was found yesterday? And we may or may not find that out tomorrow. We may get a hint. I don't know. Probably going to get nothing, but their lawyer, Steve, is going to be holding a presser around 1 p.m. tomorrow from New York. That's Eastern time. So if you're on a time difference, check it in comparison to Eastern time. At one point, a tow truck backed into the Laundrie's driveway and towed away the Mustang that has been of much discussion. It's believed that this is Brian's car and the car he allegedly, according to his parents, had driven to Carlton Reserve, which is not far from their home, to go hiking last Tuesday, so almost a week ago. But the parents claim that he never returned, and this is why they reported him missing this past Friday. And they had ended up bringing this Mustang back from the park because a note was left on the car warning that it would be towed. A reporter who's been at the home all week has still shots of the Mustang not in the driveway on Tuesday, but it was back again on Wednesday. But the family lawyer claims that the parents brought this Mustang home on Thursday. So there's a conflicting issue here, okay? I'm going to go with the photo evidence because it has stamps on it, and it's more believable, right? Now, somebody can edit timestamps, but this guy's a legitimate, credible reporter. I doubt he did that. Interesting here, though, is my question is, did his parents have a spare key to the Mustang? Totally possible. Or did Brian leave the keys in the car because he knew he was fleeing and wasn't going to be back? Or did the parents have access to only one set of keys because they aided him in fleeing? We can add that to our list of $1 million questions here. While all this was going on, just complete chaos, news broke, even more news, that the 911 call that was made about Gabby and Brian's altercation on the 12th of August was released. And in this brief 911 call, the witness said, listen up, it said, the male, who we know to be Brian, was hitting and slapping her. And by her, we now know, was Gabby. I'm going to try to play for you real quickly. It's real quick, real brief video. It won't take long.
Hi, can you hear me, sir?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Hi, I'm calling. I'm right on the corner of Main Street by Moonflower, and we're driving by, and I'd like to report a domestic dispute. Florida with a white van, Florida license plate, white land, gentleman,
Where's it at?
5-6 years. They just drove off. They're going down Main Street. They made a right onto Main Street from Moonflower.
Or what were they doing?
Cooperative, but what'd you say?
What were they doing?
We drove by and the gentleman was slapping the girl.
He was slapping her?
Yes, and then we stopped. They ran up and down the sidewalk. He proceeded to hit her, hopped in the car, and they drove off.
Okay, you said it's a white van?
White van. I can give you the license plate. Just give me 1 sec. I took a picture of it.
What kind of white van? Like a big one?
It was a smaller van with the license plate of, it was white, Florida license plate QFT G03. It was, the make was a Ford, model was Transit, black ladder on the passenger side.
Black ladder, passenger side.
White Ford Transit.
White Ford Transit. Okay, what's your name? And where did they, so they headed south on Main Street from Moonflower Market?
Correct, they made the right turn.
The operator then asked a bunch of questions trying to figure out where the car went, so it's not really necessary for me to play you all of that because he was a little confused on where they went. So as you heard the man say, he said that the gentleman was hitting and slapping the female, her. Man, oh man. I said on this channel twice that I felt that this was an abusive relationship and that it was not Gabby who was the aggressor. And I felt that the second Gabby got out of the van and she blamed herself. That was red flag number 1. Red flag number 2 was when she called herself mean, as if she had been constantly told that she was mean and was just repeating it. Third red flag was when they were talking to Brian about his injuries. He was quick to dismiss them and say he was fine, then followed up saying, I hope she doesn't have anything bad to say about me. And he did a nervous laugh. The fourth red flag was she was hysterical, yet feet away from her, he was calm and cool as a cucumber. Fifth was him being dismissive of her. When discussing if she was on medication, he basically said he didn't, not that he knew of, and then he called, and said, well, she's just crazy. Sixth red flag was Gabby saying that he didn't support her and her blog. And you can tell, at least to me anyways, that she was terrified. She didn't want to tell the police the truth because she likely had an attachment to Brian. And she also knew that if she did, Brian would be livid and their trip would end. And she wanted to be on that trip. Or maybe it's a combination of all three. I think the officers did the best they could by separating them for the night. But overall, I do believe, and I'm not going to tiptoe around this anymore after hearing this 911 call, I do believe that they missed some pretty glaring signs of abuse and that more was going on. But with Gabby not willing to speak up, what more could they have done, in all honesty? Right? Now, I'm not ex-law enforcement, current law enforcement, or future law enforcement. I never have, never will be. So I can't really speak to whether these officers were in the right or the wrong. I know that many ex-law enforcement or ex-homicide investigators have spoken out about this body cam and have expressed that it was handled entirely wrong. So don't go off me, go off them. I haven't really seen any of them defend the police in that particular situation. Now, that 911 call is very upsetting. And I do have to wonder if someone was in the wrong but maybe it wasn't the actual officer. Maybe it was the operator. Did he miscommunicate with the officers that were in the field responding to this 911 call about what was seen by the witness? Or did the officer misunderstand? Or did he just change his entire tune once he got on the scene and they're both blaming her? So he's just like, okay, well, it must have been her. I don't know. Was there more than one call? I don't know. That's possible. But then that means two witnesses would be saying something different. One saying that he was hitting and slapping her, and one saying the opposite, right? And I would think that if there was another 911 caller, that they would have released both 911 calls instead of just the one today. And I said in other videos that I think these officers are likely kicking themselves, okay? They've definitely gone over in their head over and over again their interaction with this couple and have considered if something was overlooked. I think we would all do that if we were them. But it was already handled, right? And it can't be changed. It was already done. And I'm sure if something was done that was wrong, we'll hear about it at a later date. And possibly protocols will get changed because of Gabby. And that's usually how changes happen, is from somebody's story. You know, when this 911 call was released today, people were automatically trying to say that this witness was wrong because Gabby did not say that Brian hit her, and he's the one that had the scratches. They're proclaiming with absolute certainty that she was the aggressor. Well, if the witness was telling the truth in this 911 call, and he saw what he said he saw, that means that Brian was slapping, hitting, and pushing Gabby's face away, and jumping in the car, or the van, her van, and locked her out. And Gabby was scared enough to jump into the van because she had a fear that he was going to leave her abandoned. Okay? With that in mind, wouldn't you also scratch him and attack him and try to stop him and defend yourself? Come on. In reality, think about it. He had scratches. If he truly was hitting, slapping, pushing her face, locking her out of her own van, and attempting to leave her there, did you expect her to just take it? Or would you have expected that she was clawing her way back into her van because she didn't want to be left? I think that's the right answer, right? Okay. So him having scratches really doesn't mean that she was the aggressor. We don't have the backstory, okay? And I'm sorry if I'm a little angry or my tone changed or I got a little sarcastic there. But I think this is absurd to just say, oh, well, she was the aggressor because he had scratches, without considering what happened prior to him having those scratches. And considering that she probably scratched him as a defense type of thing. I mean, consider that. And depending on what part of the body he was hitting her, if he was hitting and slapping her, as the witness claimed, it wouldn't necessarily be visible at the time of the traffic stop, but it could have been later in the form of bruises. Now, that being said, if you go to the footage when she's in the backseat crying and she's looking up at the cop with her hands, on her lap, you do see a large red area on her arm. Okay? The footage is not the greatest of quality, but you do see it. And it does look like she has a bruise on her leg. Now, they are out hiking in this area for weeks, so she could have gotten that prior because bruises don't form that quickly. But the red mark on her arm definitely looks newer. And since I felt she showed signs of abuse after watching that body cam footage, and now we have this 911 caller alleging that he was hitting her, I'm going with that's what actually happened. Because I have not believed all week that it went down as Brian and Gabby claimed it did. And I felt that both were lying and downplaying the situation, but for separate reasons. That's me. That's what I believe. Is it possible that this was a toxic relationship and both were doing awful things? Sure. Okay, that's possible. Except I didn't pick up on any abuse signs in him. I didn't. And with Gabby, I immediately did. And let's not forget, Gabby's the one who's dead. Okay? So, there's that. One can say she's dead because she attacked him, and so he killed her in self-defense. Well, think about that for a second. Self-defense? From who? A woman who was a little over 5 feet tall and maybe 115 pounds soaking wet? Really? So this brings on a whole other thing that needs to be discussed here. Injuries of abuse are not always seen on the outside. Here are some signs of what an abused individual will show. Agitation, anxiety, or constant apprehension, changes in sleep habits, extremely apologetic or meek. If you recall, Gabby kept saying, I'm sorry. It's me, it was my fault, blah, blah, blah. Low self-esteem, she showed that as well, and blames themselves, fearful, and depression. And that's just a few. And she showed a lot of those. Know the signs. Educate yourselves. Someone in your life might be exhibiting these signs, and it's being overlooked. Somebody on my TikTok made a comment when I shared the 911 call saying something to the effect of, well, she stayed with him, so there's no sympathy from me. As if this is like 1960, not 2021. It's an extremely ignorant statement. And it's rather concerning that there's somebody out there that could be so uneducated on a very important topic, and there's really no excuse for that when we all have Google at our fingertips to educate ourselves on it. Okay? So it's extremely ignorant. Now, this person might have just been a troll, right? Because there's trolls everywhere. Just the fact that they would type that regardless is ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. Now, think about it. A male called 911 to report what he saw. If it was Gabby that was attacking Brian, do you really think this witness would have been concerned for Brian's safety? I think he would have been concerned for Brian only if he had witnessed Gabby with a weapon or like trying to run Brian over with the fan. Which at that point, then yes, I would see that there would be a concern for Brian. But I think it makes more sense that he called about him hurting her because obviously he's bigger than her, right? So I can understand a male being concerned, like, I'm looking at this guy and he's hitting this girl and it's making me uncomfortable. I'm going to call it in. Could it be that the caller was confused because Brian did admit that he pushed her face, so maybe that's what he saw and it wasn't actually that he was seeing him hitting? Okay. We can, consider that. But he said it was hitting and slapping like it was done multiple times. Here's what he said. Quote, the gentleman was slapping the girl, and we stopped. They ran up and down the sidewalk, and he proceeded to hit her. They jumped in the car and drove off. Unquote. So that doesn't really sound like he possibly mixed up a face shove with a slap. It doesn't sound that way. It sounded like it was multiple, hitting or slapping. And he sounded pretty certain of what he saw. And it also sounded like he wasn't the only one who witnessed it. It sounded like he was with a passenger because he said, we were driving. Not sure about you, but I'd love to hear from this witness and what he actually saw unfold in further detail and what he's feeling and thinking now since this case began, starting with Gabby being missing and now finding out that she's deceased. Because he tried. He did call 911 and he did try to get her help. If this goes to a trial, he'll definitely be taking the stand, I'm sure, but we'll see. It makes me feel a little ill thinking of what was really going on inside Gabby's mind during that stop, as she was looking at the officer with such fear in her eyes. And consider for a moment how this makes her parents feel, hearing this 911 call the day after their daughter was found deceased. Just think about that. It's horrible. And if it was truly an abusive relationship, they may never have known. Or it's possible that they did. But I think if they knew, they wouldn't have been excited for the couple to take this trip like they claimed they were. Now, it could be that Gabby did express that they were fighting a lot because they were together so much. But, told them this while they were gone, right? And that would explain why the FBI asked the parents not to talk about the relationship. And as we proceed here, I'm going to give you the answer to this because we found out today. I'm not going to tell you yet, but I'm almost there. I was willing to throw Brian a bone. I threw him a lot of bones. After seeing the body cam footage, I felt the story was much different than what was presented. But I still decided to give it time and see what happened next. In my head, I thought, this body cam footage is helpful, but it doesn't paint the whole story, right? It's just one piece of that story. So I was like, what? I'm just going to give it time. I'm just going to keep throwing Brian some bones, right? Okay. Well, it didn't take long for me to give it time, because not long after, we find out that Brian fled. And at that point, I was fresh out of patience with Mr. Laundrie. Okay? He left his girlfriend, regardless if dead or alive, alone in an area she was not familiar with. Strike one. He returned to Florida with her van and did not tell anybody who mattered that she did not return with him. Strike two. He didn't answer her family's calls and texts, desperately searching for their daughter. Strike three. He lawyered up before she was even reported missing. Strike four. He refused to guide them to even a general location of the last time he saw her or was with her. Strike five. And the final strike for me was him fleeing. And I say fled because that's exactly what happened. I know he's not a suspect, but let's cut the BS and call it what it is. He fled. Innocent until proven guilty. I absolutely firmly believe in that. But as I said before, in this circumstance, there's no logical, reasonable explanations to overcome every single one of these strikes I just listed. I'm going to wait for the cause and manner of death and for more evidence to come out to, before I form a full theory or opinion. But I'm just personally kind of done with attempting to give the benefit of the doubt, play both sides as I have been in this series of videos about Gabby. I'm annoyed, and I want Brian Laundrie brought in, alive. And if I'm wrong, and he miraculously is innocent, so be it. But nothing this dude has done shows innocence. We shall see, because the truth will prevail. around 6 p.m. tonight, the FBI wrapped up at the Laundrie home, and they arrived there, I would say it was about 10 a.m., so that's a good 8 hours they were in the home. And the sky, in true Florida weather fashion, opened up, causing severe downpour as the agency had pulled up a white van right to the garage door to load up some boxes. And many people assumed they were loading up evidence, but upon further looking at the video, it appears to be a lot of cardboard boxes. And I do wonder, and I did consider that this was actually Gabby's items that she left at the home before she went on the trip with Brian. I think her parents would want those items, and I highly doubt they had any plans to ask the Laundries to meet up with them to retrieve it. And I think it's possible the FBI collected it for them and also to look through it first for anything that could be helpful. But that's just my opinion. It could be that it was both evidence and her stuff, or just evidence. Obviously, we don't know for sure, but I would think it was a lot of that was Gabby's items. A Dr. Phil episode aired today, but it had been recorded this past Friday, and it had Joe Petito and his wife Tara, who is Gabby's stepmom. And Joe Petito showed great hope and strength during this segment. He did mention that Gabby was never diagnosed with OCD like she claimed to police. He said that she liked things in place, especially in that small, tiny van that they were living in, and, that she might have just said that as a way to describe her cleanliness, basically. And I'm going to go with that he's right on this, because one, it's his daughter, so he knows, but two, I hear a lot of people who self-diagnose themselves as OCD simply because they're clean or organized, when that's not actually what OCD fully entails. He said he would speak to Gabby 1 to 2 days a week, but she also spoke to her mom 2 to 3 times a week. So, when they started not to hear from her, this was, starting to get worrisome. And as more time went past and they started calling other people to see if they had heard from her, that's when, that panic, that bad feeling kind of set in. And he shared that when they were calling and texting Brian to look for Gabby, and then his mom and his dad, he actually said that they also tried contacting Brian's sister, Cassie, but that she didn't reply either. Maybe she was highly confused. Maybe she didn't even know Brian was back, so she's like looking at the text going, what the heck are they talking about? I don't know, but she didn't reply either. And he actually ends up apologizing to Cassie, because what happened was he heard only a clip of her interview the other day, and I read that to you, and then I read to you what his reply back to her was, and it was basically him bashing her for saying that she and her kids loved Gabby. Basically, Joe said that he only saw a clip of her interview, and he reacted to that, and he later saw the longer clip, and so he was apologizing to Cassie on the Dr. Phil show for judging and attacking her in that interview that she gave. And I think that was really nice that he did that, because, considering what her family's put him through, he didn't need to apologize to her, right? Especially if she hadn't been answering his calls when he was desperately looking for his daughter on the 10th. And speaking of Brian's sister, Cassie, she had shared with Good Morning America her last communications with Gabby. This first one is a text, and it says, quote, oh my gosh, I can't believe school started already. Haha, I saw your post on Instagram, so cute. Send me pictures of the boys to show Brian. Laugh out loud. And I love their backpacks too, unquote. And then she said, quote, we're in the Arches right now. We don't have the best Wi-Fi, but we did send you some mail, unquote. And she also sent Cassie several postcards, including from Utah's Goblin Valley State Park and Red Canyon, part of the state's Dixie National Forest, about 10 miles outside of Bryce. And the postcards said, quote, guess what? Oh my gosh, me and Uncle Brian are sitting on a rock eating a snack after our long walk, and the fattest squirrel I've ever seen came right on my lap, and its tiny hand stole a piece of my granola bar I was eating. Can you believe it? He must steal everybody's food. Oh man, that's wild. A squirrel, laugh out loud, Aunt Gabby, unquote. In another postcard, Gabby wrote, quote, Uncle Brian and I miss you so much. Everywhere we go reminds us of you, like the red rocks at Bryce Canyon. The sky here is so open. There's more stars than I've ever seen. Scorpio's so big and bright every night. It's always the first one to me and Uncle Brian's spot. Love, Aunt Gabby, unquote. So that's really sweet. I wonder if Uncle Brian ever contacted his sisters and nephews, or was it just Gabby that was doing it for the both of them? Shortly after the FBI arrived at the Laundrie home, 2 agents showed up at Cassie's home, and I can only assume that they were there to possibly check to see if Brian was hiding out there, but I can't say that for certain. There was no live feed for this, as most reporters were at her parents' home. One person did get a picture proving they had stopped by Cassie's home, and we had a search warrant that came out, and it wasn't the one about the home search. It was about, in the beginning of the week, last week, about a external hard drive, that was found in Gabby's van. And basically, now keep in mind, when you're trying to get a search warrant, right, it's the probable cause. You're trying to basically describe to a judge reasons why they should approve this particular search warrant. And sometimes I wouldn't call them lies, but they'll list all sorts of things that may or may not be true as a way to kind of convince this judge. And so, at one point it talks about mental health. And so people were like, oh, maybe she really was mentally ill and she killed herself. And I think they listed that as a way to convince the judge, And if you think about it, if she had been abandoned, because when this was written, we didn't know she was deceased yet. So in the mindset of, like, if she was abandoned and left out there alone with no food or transportation or money, blah, 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 then, yeah, you'd obviously be worried about her mental health. So then saying that on this warrant was a way to kind of convince them, not necessarily that they lied or that they really were concerned about her mental health because she has mental health issues and she possibly killed herself. So you have to keep that in mind. And in there it talks about, and this was the answer that I was going to give you earlier, and I said you had to wait until now for me to tell you, that her mother, Nicole, said there appeared to be more and more tension between her and Brian as they continued on their cross-country van trip, and that there are actually text messages of Gabby telling her mother this. So we do know that that Gabby did at some point tell at least her mother that they were having issues and had been possibly bumping heads, arguing, whatever. And the warrant also listed, obviously, the incident on 8/12. And also, according to the document, on August 27th, Gabby's mother received an odd text from Gabby in which she referenced her grandfather by the name Stan. And Nicole said this was strange to her because, Gabby wouldn't have called her grandfather by his first name. And so this concerned her that either something was wrong with Gabby or that it wasn't actually Gabby who sent this text. And, they also talk about locating any and all external storage devices, emails, text messages, internet browsing history, etc., and that they wanted to search this external hard drive because it may potentially contain evidence that a felony had been committed. So now that text message on the 27th that concerned Nicole is in addition to the text that she got on the 30th that said, no service in Yosemite that we've talked about several times now. And we know they weren't anywhere near Yosemite. Like, this could be an autocorrect issue, sure. And that was on the 30th. Brian was back in Florida on the 1st, which was 2 days later. And the video footage of the van on the side of the dirt road near the location where Gabby's body eventually was found was taken on the 27th. So do the math. The same day that the mother got this text about Stan is the day that this van was near the area that Gabby's body ended up being found. I think there's a very good possibility that that was Brian in both texts. We're going to find out, though, so I'm not going to say that for sure. And people were considering, maybe this text was Gabby's way of, reaching out to her mom for help. Well, her mom can't do anything for her if she was in a dangerous situation halfway across the country. I think that if Gabby was going to call for help, she would have called local police, not her mother. I mean, that doesn't really make much sense. I think the fact that Stan was said definitely points more to Brian because, obviously that's not his grandfather, so he would refer to him as Stan. Maybe he didn't even think about it when he wrote it, or maybe after he sent it, he was like, oh shit, I said Stan. We don't know. I think a lot of people are trying to come up with ways to exonerate Brian, okay? They're still considering, maybe they got into a fight, he left her, and when he came back, she had hurt herself. And of course, anything's possible, okay? But the issue, like we've discussed in other videos, is that, so you're telling me that he left, he came back, he finds his girlfriend dead, and he's just like, oh, okay, well, that sucks. I'm just going to take the van and go home. I actually appreciate seeing so many people trying to basically fight for Brian to be innocent. I know that it's hard to believe that this couple had an ending like this, and people don't want to believe that. And I do not usually see this in cases. Usually me and just a few others are the ones going, just wait, it could be this, it could be that, critically thinking, and let's consider this, and stop being so biased, and don't hang the person, and you have the mobs of people who laugh at your comments and attack you and argue with you, and it's just a complete train wreck. So it's actually pleasantly surprising to see so many people trying to basically say he didn't do this, and if he did anything, he just stranded her. He's just a shitty person. Hey, I'm glad so many people are trying to stay reasonable and consider all possible situations. That being said, like I said many times in all my videos about Gabby, every path you go down to try to consider that this was something other than Brian, it still comes back to Brian. Because in this circumstance, in this story, they left together. They were together in a van. It wasn't like they were even staying at hotels. She did, for a period of time, but not very long. And they were in this van together. And he came back, the van came back, and she didn't. And I hate to keep saying that, but I feel like I need to hammer that home. Because no matter how you spin it, he still left her. Now, is that a crime? Well, you gotta let cops decide that, right? I don't know. But what does that say about him as a person? I think it says a lot. What does it say about the fact that if he did just leave her there alive or dead, why he wouldn't want to, after the fact, panicking and getting home, being like, oh my God, I have to tell them something, or I have to tell them, and come forth and help them locate her body, or at least say, hey, I got into a fight with her and I walked away, and when I came back she was gone, and I looked for her and I couldn't find her, so I left because I thought she abandoned me. this is where the last place I saw her. Go search there. You might find her. Right? And if she truly died from bears or buffalo or whatever else is out there, they'll be able to tell that. But he didn't do that. So, a few more things and we're going to be done for the night. There was a post earlier tonight that really upset me. It was that one of her siblings posting saying that they're going to be doing a balloon release in honor of, Gabby soon, in the next couple of days. I forget the exact day. And immediately, everybody started commenting, no, that's bad for the environment, it's going to kill all our sea animals, blah, 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 blah. People were going, write these person right now. Everybody write her right now and ask her to consider something else. And Gabby loved the environment. She would never want this, etc., etc., etc. Listen, I know the environment's important. Our sea animals are important. I understand. That being said, I don't think that it's appropriate to write a family member who just found out 24 hours ago that their daughter is deceased, most likely murdered, and tell them that the way they're choosing to grieve is wrong, and that you know Gabby better and you know that she wouldn't like that than they do. We didn't know Gabby. They did. We didn't lose Gabby. They did. I know we get attached to these stories, but we gotta draw a line. To bother these parents or these siblings who are all younger than Gabby, and Gabby was only 22, and tell them that what they're doing and what they decided to do to grieve was by releasing balloons, and telling them they're wrong for doing that? Are you kidding me? People, they just lost their daughter, their sister, their niece, their friend. In my opinion, that's not appropriate. Let them do what they want to do. I think we can care about the environment and, sea life, but maybe just not on this particular day, and allow them to have whatever it is that makes them feel some type of comfort. But I can't control people. I can only express my opinion on the matter, right? To me, this is not okay to bother these people right now. But hey, who am I? And on a final note, the van arrived in Northport, Florida at 10:26 a.m. on September 1st. This was in the search warrant, and it sounded like they had tracked it via traffic lights, or I'm not sure if there's any tolls out there in Northport. I know certain areas of Florida do. But that's when he arrived back home, and the drive is from Grand Teton National Park, roughly about 35 to 36 hours. Now, that's without stopping at all, and that is, very quick stops to gas up, go to the bathroom, get a drink, get a snack, whatever. And does not obviously consider bad weather, and it also doesn't consider traffic at some point, or a car accident that held up traffic. So, could he have driven straight through at 35, 36 hours? Sure, absolutely he could have. I have done many road trips, and one particular road trip was only supposed to be 14 hours, but there was a lot of detours, and then we hit traffic, and then there was a car accident, and it ended up taking us like 25 hours one time. Yeah. Why we didn't get off the highway? I don't know. Great question. But we didn't. And we drove straight through, and it's possible. And there's been other road trips where I did myself that, were 18, 19, 20 hours, straight through, no stopping. I was much younger, though. I would never do that now. But he could have. Okay, he could have, because if you can think about it, if he did do something to Gabby, his adrenaline was pumping, and he would have been in a fight or flight type of mind frame. And so in his mind, it's, I gotta get out of Dodge, I gotta get the hell out of this area and get back to Florida, stat. And his adrenaline was going. So it's absolutely possible that he stood up and did the whole drive back in that 35 to 36 hours, as long as he didn't hit bad weather or traffic or anything like that. So if you just go off of that alone, that brings you to about 10:30 on the 30th, 10:30 at night on the 30th, him leaving that area and arriving 10:30 a.m., a day and a half so later. If you add in all the other hiccups, then he could have left the area midday on the 30th. And this goes back to the text that Nicole received saying no service in Yosemite. Obviously, if Brian was already in the van on his way back, they weren't in Yosemite and they weren't in Yellowstone. And now we know they never made it to Yellowstone because she was found in Grand Teton National Park. So on that note, tomorrow is the lawyer presser by the Laundrie family. That will be at 1 o'clock Eastern Time. The FBI did not do a press conference today. They don't normally typically do that anyways. Usually it's only to announce when the body's been found or an autopsy, whatever. Northport Police held off on interviews today. They possibly will speak tomorrow about what unfolded at the Laundrie home today. We may hear tomorrow or before the end of the week what this specific home search warrant said, and maybe we would get a little bit more information. Gabby's autopsy is scheduled for tomorrow. The cause and manner of death from an autopsy usually comes out rather quick. Few days, sometimes quicker if they ask, kind of for a rush on it. It usually takes weeks, months, and in some cases years when there's more factors and you're waiting on toxicology, which kind of finalizes the autopsy. But getting the basics of, was this a homicide? How did she die? Was she stabbed? Was she shot? Did she have blunt force trauma? Did she have strangulation? Was she beat to death? Etc. And that will be pretty interesting to hear. If I had to consider what I think the manner of death and cause of death is going to be, I think it's going to be homicide, and I think it's going to be either strangulation or blunt force trauma. And I hate to even say these words, but that's what I believe will be one of the two, because of the area that they were in and the many objects close by that could have been used to cause blunt force trauma, or possibly a shove that caused blunt force trauma. I could be wrong. This isn't a game. I'm not trying to be right about this poor girl's cause of death. And we're going to find out, though. And so continue to keep her family in your prayers. I did see that Gabby's father spoke with Dr. Phil today. It's coming out on Wednesday. So this will be after him finding out that Gabby is deceased. So we'll hear from him through Dr. Phil. So until next time, I'll see you soon. So this is one of those recordings where I come back immediately because something happened while I was recording. Actually, two things. And so I'm adding on to this video, and this is the problem with covering a case that's unfolding in real time. There's constantly updates, and I can't get to them fast enough. So I just said that the lawyer for the Laundries was going to hold a press conference tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. When I got off the recording, I immediately saw that it had been canceled. And at first, everybody was saying that it wasn't true because this person didn't confirm it and that person didn't confirm it yet, and they were all arguing over whether or not it was true. And then as that was going on, then it was confirmed that it is true. I guess we'll wait and see whether or not it's true, but apparently he said that after he spoke with the FBI today, he has decided to cancel that press conference. Now, that can mean all sorts of things. We can try to have a guessing game of what that means. Who knows? I guess we're going to have to wait and see what happens. So, that's that. And then I also saw earlier today, there's a lot of talk about Brian being seen here and Brian being seen there. Somebody saw him in St. Augustine. Somebody saw him in Texas. Somebody saw him in, I think it was Louisiana. All sorts of places. And one of the places that people were saying that he was seen at was Alabama. And apparently the police are investigating this so-called sighting of Brian Laundrie in Alabama. It doesn't mean that they're in Alabama searching for him or having Alabama officials search for him. They're investigating it to see if it's even possibly true. I'm going with probably not. I don't know where Brian is. Brian can be freaking anywhere. He can be dead. He can be out of the country. He could be in Mexico. He can be in Alabama. He can be in Wyoming. He can be in California. We don't know. We have no idea what this dude is. So, we'll find out tomorrow if this press conference happens. And if it doesn't, we might find out why it didn't. But I guess we're just going to have to stay tuned. So now, have a good evening.